Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the tutorial. In our previous episode, I believe we added bullet collision, and we added a few little enemies that you can shoot, hit them a couple times with a bullet. We basically did some bullet collision resolution. And in today's episode, so we got a nice little framework here, we're actually going to take a bit of a different approach, and we're going to add different guns to the game and add a way to cycle through guns. So we're going to be adding a system where we can have multiple different weapons, and the different weapons will have different properties. So I'll show you guys exactly how to do that. To start off, we're going to make a new object, and this is going to be a controller object. So we can use this object. I'm just going to call it object control. And we can use this object for lots of things in the game. But to start off with, it's just going to be for our weapon system. We have object control. I'm also going to add it to the room straight up. You don't need to give it a sprite or anything. You can just chuck it in here. And we're going to, so in the object control, it's essentially going to assign a bunch of variables, and it's basically we're going to declare the different weapons inside here. And the player will be able to access those weapons. So if we pick up a weapon, the weapon will have an ID, which will just be a number. It'll be able to ask object control what weapon or what are the stats and such on the weapon. And then, yeah, the player will be able to switch its weapon out. So I've added this to the room. We need to change the instance order, which is in here somewhere. Because when you add things in GameMaker, where is this? Creation. Forgive me, I think they've changed this layout. It could be crazy. Spec type none, instances. Yada yada yada, room. Is it up here? Oh, yeah, up here. Instance creation order. There we go. So inside a room, we have a whole bunch of objects that we've added to this room, a bunch of instances of objects. And if we come up into this instant creation order, we get to choose essentially like the order in which the instances spawn. And why this is important is that every time an instance spawn, it runs its create code. And we want the create code of our object control to be ran for our object player, because we're going to be accessing it. We're going to be accessing code in object control from our player, so like pretty much straight off the bat. Because we are going to start with a gun, it's gonna check with object control what that gun will be. So now that we have that, we go into object control, and I'll show you exactly how we're going to do this. We're actually going to have a list. We're going to use a list approach, where we declare a list by writing our variable name will be weapon list, and we can go weapon list equals ds list create. So a DS list, DS just stands for data structure. It's essentially in GameMaker, it is a list of pretty much anything. You can put anything inside a list. It could be an integer, like a number value. But you can also put something called structs, which is what we're going to add to the list. And each struct will just contain, you can think of it as a little container that just has the information about the weapon that we're after. So I'll show you exactly what that looks like. So we're going to create this weapon list. Also, when you use DS list create, you always want to destroy these lists as well. So if you create a cleanup event, the cleanup event is an event that runs when the instance is destroyed or when the game ends. So the cleanup event's pretty important, and we can, inside the cleanup event, we want to destroy the list that we create. So it's DS list destroy, and then we can chuck weapon list in here. There we go. And so this will essentially run at like the end of the game or the end of the room. Whenever this object control, it goes out of, We don't want it anymore. We're going to destroy the list, which just frees up the memory and stops you getting some issues. All right, so we've got our weapon list. And then what we're going to actually do is we're going to define a function. I might actually define it above, like up the top here. And this function, so we can define a function by going function add weapon. Something like this. So making an add weapon function. And all this function is going to do is we're going to be able to pass it a bunch of variables to do with our weapon that we're creating. And then it's going to be able to create, it's going to add it to the list essentially. So what we'll do is we can have, you kind of got to think about, depending on your game, you've got to have a little bit of thought of like what kind of differences are between the guns and what kind of variables do you want. I'm just going to write some generic ones that we're probably going to use. So for example, name, each gun has a different name. Something like reload speed probably is good. Something like automatic. Like, is the gun automatic or is it a semi-auto? Probably the bullet type. You can add all kinds of stuff. I'm just gonna add accuracy. And maybe we can add move speed. Maybe the player's move speed's different, you know? Like in Counter-Strike, when you're holding a knife, you run faster, right? So we can have a whole bunch. You can add pretty much whatever you want, but if there's anything that you do want the guns to change, you need to add them into this function here. So our add weapon function, we're just gonna pass it a bunch of things to do with a gun. Oh, also we'll add the sprite as well. It's probably an important one. So we can change what the sprite is, which is just the picture that it's drawing on the screen. And we can do, for example, here, we're going to DS list add. So we're going to add to our list. That list being weapons list. And we're going to add the struct. And to do a struct, it's going to look a little weird if you haven't seen a struct. A struct basically looks like this. So if I made a new variable, let's say this strut, a struct would look like this. So if I was assigning a variable struct, if I was assigning a struct to a variable called struct like this, I'm not going to do this, but you use these curly brackets. And inside the curly brackets, you can define any variables you want. So for example, name, you'd write name and then you'd write colon. And then you could, for example, I could put a string here. Jeff. So this would make a struct, and that struct stores a value called name. That's all that's going on here. And then if you want to add extra things, you can add a comma, and you can write, for example, height. And maybe his height's 100, whatever that means. So you can see that we can create a struct, which is just a sort of container that stores a bunch of values. And the advantage of this is that we can, later on, we can access those values. So later on, we can ask structs. If we want to get the name Jeff out of the struct, we can write struct dot, and then you can see that already popped up. Underscore name is what we name the variable. If we ever say struct dot underscore name, what it's going to do is it's going to grab the name from our struct, which will be Jeff. And we can also change it. So we can also like write struct. So maybe I want it to be that letter spam, right? And so now it's no longer Jeff. It's, I guess we can write sad. So the structs are super useful because we can just access these values, and we can also store the structs in a list, which is going to be really good. You'll see exactly why in a moment. And so we have DS list add. We're adding to our weapon list, and we're adding a struct. So I've just tabbed this down just for clarity. So this is the struct here. I'll actually write that for you as well. We haven't had too much comments in this series, but there we are. And inside the struct, we're just going to store basically all of these values that we've passed in. So we can go underscore name. Actually, we'll just call it name. And then we'll put a comma. Make sure you don't forget the commas. Reload speed. Probably something like fire rate as well would be kind of clever to put in. Automatic, which is going to be a Boolean value. So that can be, yep. You don't have to declare any variable types in GameMaker, which is like really convenient. It can be annoying because you kind of just have to remember what types things are. But for the most part, I would say it's probably convenient. So I'm going to type all of these in. Also get rid of these. You can name them whatever you want. You can add whichever ones you want, but I'm going to use this format where our variables are just standard lowercase and we use an underscore for our arguments that we passed in. I think that's a fairly decent sort of naming convention. Also, I'm pretty sure I named my functions quite weirdly. Usually with functions, the standard naming convention is to use this called a camel case, where with variables you'll use underscores like this between words, and with functions you start with a lowercase, but every word is just slapped on the end with a capital. So this is camel case, so it's like camel humps. And that's sort of this typical naming convention. All right, so we've got sprite. This looks like everything, to be completely honest. So we've got our struct. So whenever we call add weapon, what we're doing is we're adding a new weapon to the weapon list, which just adds a struct. So we're just adding a struct into the weapon list. And the best way to think of lists is that you have a bunch of elements next to each other, right? An element being just a thing that's in the list. So in this case, we're going to have a bunch of structs in the list, and you can imagine they're all kind of lined up in order, and we're going to be able to access them with a number. So 0 will be the first. So if we reference 0, we can grab the 0th position, which is the first position of our list, and that's going to pull the struct out. Likewise, we can reference the first, the second, third, whichever position we want in the list. So here, we're actually just going to add a weapon. We can add our first weapon. So we can do just here. Also, the functions don't call at the beginning of the game, so it doesn't really matter where you put them, to be completely honest. You have to put it in the create function because it has to get declared at the beginning of the life of the object, I'm fairly sure. But for example, I could have this function below this code here. I usually put my functions at the top if I am going to dump in the create code. But you can put them wherever. It doesn't matter. They don't get called. It doesn't really matter. You can put them wherever you want, to be honest. But I would recommend putting all your functions at the beginning of your create code and then having your actual sort of create code here that's going to run off the bat. All right, so now we've got this add weapon. We're going to add our first weapon. So we can do, for example, we have our sprite player idle. This weapon, this could be like a rifle or something. We'll actually make a new sprite as well, just so you guys can see what we'll have. We'll do 2 different weapons. So for example, we got sprite player, all right, pistol, we'll call it sprite player pistol idle. It's a bit of a long name, and this can be rifle. Or we'll just call it like M4A1. That's the type of gun. So there we go. So we got sprite player M4A1 idle right here. Might make it a bit, I'll exaggerate the gun a bit so you can see the difference. So we'll do like this. This looks pretty good. There we go. My boy's got a gun. And then we can go into the pistol sprite. And we'll actually do... We'll just make it like a little nub kind of thing. We'll just do like this. Like this looks good. Yeah, that's probably pretty good. I'm going to edit all the sprites later on. I really want to try to flesh the game out in this series. Because a lot of tutorials, they kind of just stop. They kind of get most of the game done and they stop. And I think in this series, I want to try to... Yeah, it looks a little strange, but you can tell it's a pistol, I guess. Yeah, in this series, I really want to try to flesh the game out. So by the end of the series, the end product's going to look really good. And when you are making games, I definitely do recommend just making crappy little placeholder sprites like this, and then you can always change the sprites out later. So do not feel bad if your player is literally a blue rectangle and you haven't even done any sprites at all. That's absolutely fine. But for this case, we want to actually be able to tell that our weapons are switching when we do switch weapons. So I've had to do a couple different sprites. We're going to add the weapon. So the name is going to be, we'll do M4A1. Why not? Reload speed. We don't have reloading yet, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to put 60, which might be like 60 frames, aka 1 second, because we're a 60 frames a second game by default. Automatic is true, which is a Boolean value, meaning it can be true or false. Bullet will be the type of bullet that we make, or that it fires, so we'll do object bullet. And that will be useful if, like, later on we make like a rocket launcher that doesn't fire regular bullets. And the accuracy doesn't matter either. I'll just put 0. M speed is how fast we want to run with the gun. Let's do like 3. And the sprite, we can do sprite player M4A1 idle. Later on, we will add multiple sprites. So we will edit this and we'll have a few sprites. Just because we'll have like an animation for the gun firing, animation for walking. I mean, walking, we can just add like a foot layer beneath our like top half sprite. So we probably don't even need walking, but we'll definitely add a gun firing animation. So we'll probably have to put a couple sprites into the arguments. So we can add M4A1. We'll also add another gun. We'll just call it pistol. Reload speed, yeah, we can keep it 60, why not? Maybe we'll make it faster, it's like 30, you know, the pistols reload fast. Is it automatic? No, it's not. It fires object bullet. We can keep that, that doesn't matter. We'll make it so the player runs faster while you're holding the pistol. And the most important thing for now is that it looks different, so we change the sprite. Okay, so what we've got here is we've defined that we have a list, a weapons list, and then we also have a function that adds a new weapon, and it just adds basically just adds a bunch of data into a struct, and that struct gets put in the list, and we're going to be able to reference. You'll see just in a second, we're going to be able to reference these structs and grab all the data out. And then we've added 2 weapons so far. So if we go into this is pretty much done for the object control. Whenever we want to add a new weapon, we can just go in here, paste this, and then write our new weapon in. So that's how easy it is going to be to add new weapons to our game. If we go to object player, we're going to have to assign a weapon. So we're going to write in here, current weapon. We could just write weapon. Let's just write weapon. And we're going to actually... I might actually make one more function inside of our object control, and that's going to be get weapon. And we'll go weapon ID equals 0. So we're going to start with the weapon that's in position 0 in the list, which is the first thing in the list. So if you're new to coding, the first thing in the list is always the 0th position. So we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's just do, We're going to set the weapon ID to 0, and then we're going to change our weapon to object control.getWeapon, which is going to be a new function that just returns the struct. So our weapon's going to be a struct. Okay, awesome. If we go in object control, we can actually just make this function. Really simple function get weapon. And get weapon, we put in an ID. So I'll put in that _ID. And all it does is it returns from the weapons list the IDth position of that weapons list. So to access a list, there's this weird kind of annotation. You can use like, there's inbuilt functions like dslist, find value, which does the exact same thing, but it's a lot faster to write it like this. So you can use dslist functions if you want to grab the elements out, but we're just going to use this where it's weapons list. It's sort of like an array. Where with your array you would access the array by having a number. So this would access the 0th position of the array. In a similar fashion, you do the same thing with list, except you just have to put this, I don't even know what this symbol's called, this line. You got to put this line to represent that you're accessing the list. So for whatever reason, that's how GameMaker language does it. And so you write weapons list, square brackets, you put the line in there, and then whichever position you want, we want to grab the IDth position, and return is just going to basically send whatever this value is, or whatever this struct is, back into whatever calls this function. So if we look here, so our player calls it. Our player calls it, and it says weapon equals object control.getWeapon, weapon ID. And so that should get the 0th position, which should be our M4A1. That should be our starting weapon, because this runs in create. And then we can actually add, I'm trying to think what the best way to do this would be. I'm just going to add a button that toggles through all the weapons. We're going to do that for now. We can change that later. So it's weapon, maybe it's called weapon toggle key. And we're just going to use Q on the keyboard because Q is not doing anything. And what we're going to do is, before we do the bullet firing, we're going to check whether the player's pressed Q. So we can do if keyboard check pressed. So did the player press Q this frame? Or did the player press whatever key we've assigned the toggle to, which at the moment is the Q. And if they did, then we need to toggle the weapon. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to copy paste this real quick. We're going to make our weapon ID increase by 1. So we're going to the next weapon. And we up it by 1. And then we assign, we basically send that ID to the object control and get the weapon. Problem with this is that it's just going to keep incrementing up by 1, even if we don't have enough weapons. So we're going to make it wrap around. So if there's only 2 weapons at the moment, which is one in the 0th position and one in the 1th position, then we need to, if we press Q and the value goes to 2, which there doesn't exist a weapon in the 2th position, we need to wrap it back down to 0. So it just cycles through. We're just going to make a quick little cycling system. To do that, it's really, really easy. All we got to do is we up the weapon ID, and then if our weapon ID is greater than DS list size, and it's the object controls weapon list, like this. If it's greater than that, then we just set the weapon ID to 0. So if the weapon ID gets too high and it doesn't exist a spot, there doesn't exist a list position there, we set it to 0. This is actually incorrect because DS list size, this is important to remember, DS list size, this returns how many elements are in a list. So if there's only one element in the list, the highest position that you can access is 0, but DS list size returns a 1 because there's one thing in the list. So I think this has to be changed to greater than or equals to. So there's 2 things in our list. If our weapon ID gets to the number 2, that means it's too high because you can't access number 2. We can only access number 0 and number 1 in our list. And so yeah, if it gets to 2, then we set it back to 0. And that should toggle through our weapons. We're going to do one more thing actually, which is we're going to come in here and we're actually just going to draw the name of the gun. So we know what gun we've got. Draw text. We'll just draw it at 2020 on the screen, which is the top left of the screen. And we'll just draw weapon dot name. So that's going to access the struct that we've stored in our weapon variable. And we can also here change the sprite as well. So we can do weapon, instead of this M4A1 sprite getting drawn all the time, we want to draw weapon.sprite. So we want the sprite to change based on what the weapon sprite is that we're currently using. That should be pretty good. We've got weapon.sprite. We're going to draw the weapon.name. I'll also do the... we'll also change the movement speed. So you can see move amount is horizontal movement times move speed. Let's just do weapon.mspeed. Yeah. So instead of the inbuilt move speed that we have here, we can actually just get rid of this for now. I'll call this like move speed bonus. And then we can make something different later. Like if we want to have like a power up, for example, that speeds you up, we can still have a move speed value here. But we've changed it so that we're grabbing the move speed from the weapon. So the weapon's basically telling us how fast we should be moving. And if we run the game, it should work. If you do get an error, you might get an error that says, so you can see here we've got, actually can't see. Yeah, I think it's because the wall's in the way. 1 second. Which is kind of hilarious. I'm just going to, in the create function, set the depth to like -1. Or like -5. So that our everything that we draw is drawn above the walls, because the walls will be default 0. Just so that we can see the weapon name text, because we can't see it because it is hidden behind one of those orange walls. This looks pretty good, to be honest. If you do get an error when you launch this that says, like, for example, in the create function, it doesn't know what object control is, that means that you haven't set it so that the instant creation order has object control above object player. So make sure that the order is correct. Later on, we'll probably not even have object control in this room. We'll probably initialize it in an earlier room so we don't have to worry about the creation order. But for now, we'll just do it like this. This is sort of the easy way to do it for now. And if we look at our game, you can see I've got an M4A1. Pretty cool. And if I press Q on my keyboard, you can see, hopefully you can see that all right. You can definitely see up here that our pistol, we're toggling between pistol and M4A1, and it's also changing our sprite. And it should also be changing our move speed. So when we got this, we're pretty slow. And then if I change to pistol, I run fast. That's the only thing we're changing right now. We haven't added reloading. The pistol still fires the same as M4A1, but we'll be able to change that later. All you've got to do is just change some of the values so that they match the weapon struct that we've now got. That's pretty awesome. And you can see we can still kill our enemies. And everything seems to be functioning pretty well. So yeah, we've just added multiple weapons to our game. In the next episode, we're actually going to go back to the bullets, and I'm going to add a couple different types of walls. So for example, we can add walls that we can shoot over, but we can't run through, like tables, for example. And we can also have walls like glass that we can't run through, and when they get hit by a bullet, they get destroyed. So we'll add some different types of walls in the next episode, and I look forward to seeing you guys then. If you enjoy the tutorial, please leave a like. And also just leave a comment, because I am going quite fast through some of the stuff. Hopefully you guys are catching up. But if there's any questions about how anything works, or you're unsure about anything, please leave a comment. I'll be super active. I can help you guys out. We'll have a bit of discussion down the bottom, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. So thank you.